So it is my privilege to make the mass talk to. Like Jean-Paul Jean, I'm the member of the scientific committee here at ISIeux, and I'm a professor emeritus of a professor that's emeritus. That just means, well, I haven't been forgotten yet. I'm retired, but I haven't been forgotten. Normally I was going to be accompanied by Laurence Le, but in the end it's just me who's presenting to you today. So we're going to talk about Henri Donnedieu de Vabres. The Judge and Professor is a work that I published recently with Laurence Le. So as a professor, he taught at the Law School of Paris and of penal law, not international law, but he was very much interested in international law. Also a professor who is very much attached to the great principles, strict interpretation of legality, non-retroactivity, individual responsibility, the secretive deliberations. These are absolutely hard principles for him. It's also very so he's very classic about those principles, but he could be very open in many other respects. Open to the idea of criminal policy. In 1938, and it was republished in 2000, talking about criminal states, and he was talking particularly about Germany and the Soviet Union. Also very open to comparative law, so comparing the law systems of different countries. Daniel Vabres co-directed a review of comparative law to which Donnedieu de Vabres participated. And he traveled a great deal as well. I'll say more about that. And very much interested in international criminal law. Since the 1920s already, in his works, he was known in France as perhaps the leading, if not the only, international penal specialist. He also spoke German, which was another reason why he participated in the Nuremberg trials. So as a judge, he was on the IMT, International Military Tribunal, and so I'll say more about that. So I mentioned Philippe Sands earlier because in the history of Donnedieu de Vabres, there's a before and an after of 2017. I can tell you what we knew before 2017, just what we saw or heard, and that he was an old man, an eminently respectable old man, a very austere, not very wordy. Let me read something that was said about him. So Falco and Faure and others said this about him. He's very silent, austere, Protestant, deep in his books and his notes, and uncomfortable in many social activities. Another person said that he is something of an allegory of justice. And with his wild hair and a large forehead, he seemed to embody a certain notion of justice as if it were a Gregorian chant. And one more comment on him from an American prosecutor about both French judges. In fact, he said, two curious little men. Falco seems insignificant, and de Vabres seemed remarkable because of his very large mustache. So austere, rather silent, but perfectly respectable. One of the rare academics, in fact. So he was amongst the few who actually taught law. They often called him Mr. Professor, dear Professor. And so he was perhaps the only one who had this higher perspective coming from teaching law. He was a brave man. He led really two battles. And I'm not talking about what everyone mentions. So he had wanted that the executions of the military men be done by a firing squad, but he didn't obtain that, and they were hanged. So that was a losing battle. But during the month of the deliberations, he criticized very heatedly the notion of conspiracy as it had been introduced in the Rome Statutes and as the Anglo-Saxons wanted to apply it. Because for him the non-retroactivity was a principle to which he adhered. And, well, he lost that battle as well. So that went forward in spite of his protestations. But there was another battle that happened from the very beginning of his arrival at Nuremberg. And he had spoken with the prosecutors about this. He contested this notion of crimes against humanity as it was conceived at the time, because it would have applied to the Germans before the war for crimes against other Germans. So, you know, with war crimes, they could be judged. But here we were talking about new types of charges. And Donnedieu de Vabres won on this terrain because the trial did not condemn the crimes of Germans against Germans before the war. He's well known for his publications. He wrote a book about the IMT, which is a reference in the matter. He also wrote about genocide and participated in the drafting of the convention. So that was what we knew of him, according to research up to 2017. But then, that year, Philippe Assan's book is published in French, an impressive and interesting book, as is the author, as you noted this morning. But it's also a book that draws a portrait that is not very flattering of Donnedieu de Vabres. That's putting it kindly. In fact, particularly if we look at page 370. And I quote from the book: the newspaper Populaire had published an article saying a Nazi judge goes to the Nuremberg trials. So calling Donnedieu de Vabres a Nazi, well, the family was horrified to see that. The public, all of the specialists are startled to see that. And the only other person who knew Donnedieu de Vabres, and this was Jean Danier, who well knew Donnedieu de Vabres, who absolutely startled by this article in the newspaper. And so at the time, when Laurence Le Thiomier and I were working on this, we thought, well, we must absolutely continue our work on Donnedieu de Vabres to look at this more closely. So Donnedieu de Vabres, a Nazi, his son died as a resistance fighter. His son worked for de Gaulle, and Donnedieu de Vabres was chosen by the Secretary General to go to Nuremberg. And he is considered a very rigorous. Jacques Bernard Herzog, another Nuremberg magistrate, praised Donnedieu de Vabres for his professionalism and rigor, and often praised Donnedieu de Vabres. In 1942, he had refused to publish an article in the Law Review because it would have required him to seek authorization from the Vichy government, and he didn't want to do that. So let me get straight to my essential points. So Philippe Sand's position is based on three facts that cannot be contested. First of all, we know that Donnedieu had never hidden the fact. He had said it to Falco and to others that in 1935 he went to Germany to an academic conference organized by Hans Frank, who was a legal specialist who ran a learned society on law. And he had dined with Mr. Frank, who 10 years later was judged and convicted and sentenced to death at Nuremberg. So having had dinner with Frank is, of course, problematic. Donnedieu de Vabres even said to Falco that he was very embarrassed by this. Retrospectively, given what we know about the European Court of Rights and the independence of the judiciary and the independence of judges, this would appear untenable, and Donnedieu de Vabres should have withdrawn. But I have several arguments with this. First of all, if we look at the if we look at various publications based on archives, what we can believe is that we can show that when Donnedieu de Vabres accepted to be a judge at Nuremberg, he didn't know yet the list of the accused, in fact. So perhaps should he have withdrawn once he learned of the list, seeing that Frank was on the list? But given how quickly things were going, it seems that he would have chosen not to withdraw, given the urgency. Also, As I said, he was a well-known academic, and, well, the conference speakers are always invited by the organizers. I'm sure that, I could tell you that I myself, out of politeness, I will accept, even if I'm not particularly thrilled by the idea. And we also know that Donnedieu de Vabres and Franck, in fact, disagreed a great deal. And in fact, Franck was very hostile to Donnedieu de Vabres on many points. But we do know that they had dinner together, and then he was the judge before Franck in 1945. But without any other form of proof does not make him a Nazi, to my knowledge. And so let's come to the second known fact, is this press article. Okay, and Falco says that, and Philippe Sanz mentions this, but neither know the date, knew the content of the article, but we managed to get our hands on it thanks to Stéphanie Boussard, working at the National Library of France. And here is the text that was published on Sunday, 7th of October, 1945. A pro-Nazi will judge war criminals. The French government has just appointed as a judge for the trial of the war criminals Mr. Henri Donnedieu de Vabres. If no other is more qualified than him, because even before the war, he had participated in the works of the German Law Academy and has published works in their academy. However, the trial will be conducted by civilized countries under international auspices. So how, therefore, can we appoint a man who has sympathized with the Nazis? He must have known them quite well, since he is a professor of criminal law. So this is an incredible turning of the coats, or of the robes in this case, appears a provocation. Of course, professors must be able to express themselves freely, but it is nonetheless a scandal that he is still on the faculty of law, but to appoint him to the trials is even more unacceptable. So the end of that article is crazy in many ways. And so we've conducted a lot of research around some of the law professors who had actually collaborated with the issue, and none of them accused Donnedieu de Vabres. And one researcher was only studying professors of criminal law, and yet he makes no mention of Donnedieu de Vabres. So that aside, well, what have we heard here in this article other than this dinner that Donnedieu de Vabres had dinner with Franck? And Philippe Sanz says that the Soviets had tried to oppose his appointment, but we don't know exactly how that would have been possible for them to oppose that. That doesn't seem possible, really. How could the Soviets tell the French Ministry of Justice what to do? But we have a different view on this. The Soviets would have given the following argument, and that would have been what was said in the article. It's the crisis of modern criminal law. Looking at Germany and the Soviet Union, and both are very hotly criticized. And so Donnedieu de Vabres, it was even more severe, more critical of the Soviet Union than of Germany. So was that made the Soviets want to try to challenge his appointment? We don't have any other evidence of this. And then, third fact. During the deliberations, Donnedieu de Vabres is the only one who voted against the death sentence against Frank. And so this is a touchy moment, of course, because the deliberations are secret. But there were some leaks that allow us to understand a bit how things happened. To my knowledge, there were only two potential there are only two sources. One is the personal notes of the judge Lidl, but we don't know if he was intending to make them public or not at the time. And the second source is a work by Falco. So Donnedieu de Vabres never expressed himself, never said anything about those deliberations. So we have his notebooks where he took notes during the hearings. They haven't been fully analyzed. Perhaps we will be able to find out more about what happens during the deliberations. But his will was, he was against the idea of publishing them. But from what we've read elsewhere, what we note is that, first of all, the French judge was the least severe of all of the judges. In fact, others wanted just about everybody to be executed. Okay, the British, and the Americans were changed positions occasionally, but what we saw was that Donnedieu de Vabres' position as concerns Frank was Frank was not the only one where he protested against a death sentence. And one of his main concerns, in fact, was to ensure fairness in the sentencing. Of course, based on what was heard during the hearings, but also given things that were said during the deliberations, to try to be sure that after the work was done, that there would be a fairness in the outcomes in sentencing. So, those three facts, which I have just presented to you, we believe that this is means that we must be very careful in the way we evaluate Donnedieu de Vabres' position, and we must be very prudent about that. And with my colleague, Laurence Le Turmy, we have looked at all of Donnedieu de Vabres' works and statements and decisions before the war, and how he worked after the war as well. And so, as you can imagine, this represented a lot of work. But at the end, he said, we were thinking, what are we looking for? to know if he was more or less a little collaborate.
Was he actually anti-Semitic here? Because that's what the article was stating, but the very proof that he wasn't anti-Semitic, we had it from the very beginning. Let me provide you that proof. It's a document in which the Ministry of Justice was informing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the choice that had been made in terms of the French judges. And the Minister of Justice, so we're talking Tergan's cabinet and all the residents, wrote to the Ministry of French Affairs. So we chose Donnedieu de Vabres, considering he's a specialist of international criminal law. He took a position during the occupation against Vichy legislation, and he speaks German fluently. That's what the people said who knew him and who chose him. Sorry, I went over time.